Hello, welcome back to our tonight's reading of
Man-eaters of Kumaon.
Jim Corbett Omnibus. We are reading about the man-eaters of Kumaon. We stopped at the point where uh, he says that my chance of accomplishing my object was about as good as finding a needle in two haystacks. Starting from the next line, we are reading plans in plenty I had made way back in Nainital. One I had already tried, and wild horses would not induce me to try it again. And the others, now that I was on the ground, were just as unattractive. Further, there was no one I could ask for advice, for this was the first man-eater that had ever been known in Kumaon. And yet something would have to be done. So for the next 3 days, I wandered through the jungle from sunrise to sunset, visiting all the places for miles around where the villagers told me there was a chance of seeing the tigress. I would like to interrupt my tale here for a few minutes to refute a rumor current throughout the hills, that on this and on several subsequent occasions, I assumed the dress of a hill woman and going into the jungle attracted the man-eaters to myself and killed them with either a sickle or an axe. All I have ever done in the matter of alteration of dress has been to borrow a sari and with it draped round me to cut grass or climbed into trees and cut leaves. And in no case has the ruse proved successful, though on 2 occasions, to my knowledge, man-eaters have stalked the tree I was on, taking cover on one occasion behind a rock and on the other behind a fallen tree, and giving me no opportunity of shooting them. To continue, as the tigress now appeared to have left this locality, I decided, much to the regret of the people of Pali, to move to Champawat, 15 miles due east of Pali. Making an early start, I breakfasted at Dhunaghat and completed the journey to Champawat by sunset. The roads in this area were considered very unsafe, and men only moved from village to village or to the bazaars in large parties. After leaving Dhunagat, my party of 8 was added to by men from villages adjoining the road, and we arrived at Champawat 30 strong. Some of the men who joined me had been in a party of 20 men who had visited Champawat 2 months earlier, and they told me the following very pitiful story. The road for a few miles on this side of Champawat runs along the south face of the hill, parallel to and about 50 yards above the valley. 2 months ago, a party of 20 of us men were on this story which they related to him. 2 months ago, a party of 20 of us men were on our way to the bazaar at Champawat, and as we were going along this length of the road at about midday, we were startled by hearing the agonized cries of a human being coming from the valley below. Huddled together on the edge of the road, we cowered in fright, as these cries drew nearer and nearer, and presently into view came a tiger carrying a naked woman. The woman's hair was trailing on the ground on one side of the tiger and her feet on the other. The tiger was holding her by the small of her back, and she was beating her chest not the tiger. The woman was beating her chest and calling alternatively on God and man to help her. 50 yards from and in clear view of us, the tiger passed with its burden, and when the cries faded and had died away in the distance, we continued on our way. And you 20 men did nothing? I asked. No, Sahib, we did nothing, for we were afraid. And what can men do when they are afraid? And further, even if we had been able to rescue the woman without angering the tiger and bringing misfortune on ourselves, it would have availed the woman nothing, for she was covered with blood and would surely have died of her wounds. I subsequently learnt that the victim belonged to a village near Champawat and that she had been carried off by the tiger while collecting dry sticks. Her companions had run back to the village and raised an alarm, and just as the rescue party was starting, the 20 frightened men arrived. As these men knew the direction in which the tiger had gone with its victim, they joined the party and can best carry on the story. We were 50 or 60 strong when we set out to rescue the woman, and several of the party were armed with guns. A furlong from where the sticks collected by the woman were lying, and from where she had been carried off, we found her torn clothes. Thereafter, the men started beating their drums and firing off their guns, and in this way we proceeded for more than a mile, right up to the head of the valley, where we found the woman, who was little more than a girl, lying dead on a great slab of rock. Beyond licking off all the blood marking her body, making her body clean, the tiger had not touched her. And there being no woman in our party, we men averted our faces as we wrapped her body in the loincloths which one and another gave, for she looked as she lay on her back as one who sleeps, and would waken in shame when touched. With experiences such as these to tell and retell through the long night watches behind fast shut doors, it is little wonder that the character and outlook on life of people living year after year in a man-eater country should change, and that one coming from outside should feel that he had stepped right into a world of stark realities and the rule of the tooth and claw, which forced man in the reign of the saber-toothed tiger to shelter in dark caverns. I was young and unexperienced in those far-off Champawat days. But even so, the conviction I came to after a brief sojourn in that stricken land, that there is no more terrible thing than to live and have one's being under the shadow of a man-eater, has been strengthened by 32 years of subsequent experience. The Tahsildar of Champawat, to whom I had been given letters of introduction, paid me a visit that night at the dark bungalow where I was putting up, and suggested I should move next day to a bungalow a few miles away, in the vicinity of which many human beings had been killed. Early next morning, accompanied by the Tahsildar, I set out for the bungalow, and while I was having breakfast on the veranda, two men arrived with news that a cow had been killed by a tiger in a village 10 miles away. The Tahsildar excused himself to attend to some urgent work at Champawat and said he would return to the bungalow in the evening and stay the night with me. My guides were good walkers, and as the track went downhill most of the way, we covered 10 miles in record time. Arrived at the village, I was taken to a cattle shed in which I found a week-old calf, killed and partly eaten by a leopard. Not having the time or the inclination to shoot the leopard, I rewarded my guides and retraced my step to the bungalow. Here I found the Tahsildar had not returned, and there was still an hour or more of daylight left. I went out with the chowkidar of the bungalow to look at a place where he informed me a tiger was in the habit of drinking. This place I found to be the head of the spring which supplied the garden with irrigation water. In the soft earth round the spring were tiger pug marks several days old, but these tracks were quite different from the pug marks I had seen and carefully examined in the ravine in which the woman from Pali village had been killed. On returning to the bungalow, I found the Tahsildar was back, and as we sat on the veranda, I told him of my day's experience. Expressing regret at my having had to go so far on a wild goose chase, he rose, saying that as he had a long way to go, he must start at once. This announcement caused me no little surprise, for twice that day he had said he would stay the night with me. It was not the question of his staying the night that concerned me, but the risk he was taking. However, he was deaf to all my arguments, and as he stepped off the veranda into the dark night, with only one man following him, carrying a smoky lantern, which gave a mere glimmer of a light, to do a walk of 4 miles in a locality in which men only moved in large parties in daylight, I took off my hat to a very brave man. Having watched him out of sight, I turned and entered the bungalow. I have a tale to tell of that bungalow, but I will not tell it here, for this is a book of jungle stories, and tales beyond the laws of nature do not consort well with such stories. I think we should look for that story somewhere. It must be a supernatural ghost story, I suppose. I spent the following morning in going around the very extensive fruit orchard and tea garden and in having a bath at the spring, and at about midday, the Tahsildar, much to my relief, returned safely from Champawat. I was standing talking to him while looking down a long sloping hill with a village surrounded by cultivated land in the distance, when I saw a man leave the village and start up the hill in our direction. As the man drew nearer, I saw he was alternatively running and walking, and was quite evidently the bearer of important news. Telling the Tahsildar I would return in a few minutes, I set off at a run down the hill, and when the man saw me coming, he sat down to take a breath. And as soon as I was near enough to hear him, he called out, "Come quickly, sir, the man-eater had just killed a girl." "Sit still," I called back, and turning, ran up to the bungalow. I passed the news to the Tahsildar while I was getting the rifle and some cartridges, and asked him to follow me down to the village. The man who had come for me was one of those exasperating individuals whose legs and tongues cannot function at the same time. When he opened his mouth, he stopped dead. When he started to run, his mouth was closed. So, telling him to shut his mouth and lead the way, we ran in silence down the hill. At the village, an excited crowd of men, women, and children awaited us, and as usually happens on these occasions, all started to talk at the same time. One man was vainly trying to quieten their babble. I led him aside and asked him to tell me what happened. Pointing to some scattered oak trees on a gentle slope a furlong or so from the village, he said a dozen people were collecting dry sticks under the trees when a tiger suddenly appeared and caught one of their number, a girl 16 or 17 years old, The rest of the parties had run back to the village, and as it was known that I was staying at the bungalow, a man had immediately been dispatched to inform me. The wife of the man I was speaking to had been of the party, and she now pointed out the tree on the shoulder of the hill under which the girl had been taken. None of the party had looked back to see if the tiger was carrying away its victim, and if so, in which direction it had gone. Instructing the crowd not to make a noise and to remain in the village until I returned, I set off in the direction of the tree. The ground here was quite open, and it was difficult to conceive how an animal the size of the tiger could have approached 12 people unseen, in its presence not detected, until attention had been attracted by the choking sound made by the girl. The spot where the girl had been killed was marked by a pool of blood, and near to it, in vivid contrast to the crimson pool of blood, was a broken necklace of brightly colored blue beads which the girl had been wearing. From this spot, the track led up and round the shoulder of the hill. The track of the tigress was clearly visible. On one side of it were great splashes of blood, where the girl's head had hung down, and on the other side the trail of her feet. Half a mile up the hill, I found the girl's sari, and on the brow of the hill, her skirt. Once again, the tigress was carrying a naked woman, but mercifully, on this occasion, her burden was dead. On the brow of the hill, the crack led through a thicket of black thorn, on the thorns of which long strands of the girl's raven black hair had caught. Beyond this was a bed of nettles through which the tigress had gone, and I was looking for a way round this obstruction when I heard footsteps behind me. Turning round, I saw a man armed with a rifle coming towards me. I asked him why he followed me. And when I asked him why he followed me when I had left instructions at the village that no one was to leave it. He said the Tahsildar had instructed him to accompany me and that he was afraid to disobey orders. As he appeared determined to carry out his orders, and to argue the point would have meant the loss of valuable time, I told him to remove the heavy pair of boots he was wearing, and when he had hidden them under the bush, I advised him to keep close to me and to keep a sharp lookout. I was wearing a very thin pair of stockings, shorts, and a pair of rubber-soled shoes, and as there appeared to be no way around the nettles, I followed the tigress through them, much to my discomfort. Beyond the nettles, the blood trail turned sharply to the left and went straight down the very steep hill, which was densely clothed with bracken and ringals. 100 yards down, the blood trail led into a narrow and very steep watercourse, down which the tigress had gone with some difficulty, as could be seen from the dislodged stones and earth. I followed the watercourse for 500 or 600 yards, my companion getting more and more agitated the further we went. A dozen times he caught my arm and whispered in a voice full of tears that he could hear the tiger either on one side or the other, or behind us. Halfway down the hill, we came on a great pinnacle of rock, some 30 feet high, and as the man had by now had all the man-eater hunting he could stand, I told him to climb the rock and remain on it until I returned. Very gladly he went up, and when he straddled the top and signaled to me he was all right, I continued on down the watercourse, which, after skirting down the rock, went straight down for 100 yards to where it met a deep ravine coming down from the left. At the junction was a small pool, and as I approached it, I saw patches of blood on my side of the water. The tigress had carried the girl straight down on the spot, and my approach had disturbed her at her meal. Splinters of bone were scattered around the deep pug marks. Uh, Splinters of bone were scattered around the deep pug marks into which discolored water was slowly seeping, and at the edge of the pool was an object which had puzzled me as I came down the watercourse, and which I now found was part of a human leg. In all the subsequent years I have hunted man-eaters, I have not seen anything as pitiful as that young comely leg, bitten off a little below the knee, as clean as though severed by the stroke of an axe, out of, out of which warm blood was trickling. While looking at the leg, I had forgotten all about the tigress until I suddenly felt that I was in great danger. Hurriedly grounding the butt of the rifle, I put two fingers on the triggers, raising my head, and as I did so, saw a littler from the 15-foot bank in front of me come rolling down at the steep side and plop into the pool. I was new to this game of man-eater hunting, or I should not have exposed myself to an attack in the way I had done. My prompt action in pointing the rifle upward had possibly saved my life, and in stopping her spring or in turning to get away, the tigress had dislodged the earth from the top of the bank. So the tigress was right above him and was about to jump on him. The bank was too steep for scrambling, and the only way of getting up was to take it at a run. Going up the watercourse a short distance, I sprinted down, took the pool in my stride, and got far enough up the other side to grasp a bush and pull myself onto the bank. A bed of bushes, the bent stalks of which were slowly regaining their upright position, showed where and how recently the tigress had passed. And a little further on, under an overhanging rock, I found where she had left her kill when she came to have a look at me. Her tracks now, as she carried away the girl, led into the wilderness of rocks, some acres in extent, where she was going, where the going was both difficult and dangerous. The cracks and chasms between the rocks were marked with ferns and blackberry vines, and one false step which might easily have resulted in a broken limb would have been fatal. Progress under these conditions was of necessity slow, and the tigress was taking advantage of it to continue her meal. A dozen times I found where she had rested, and after each of this rest, her blood trail became more distinct. This was her 436th human kill, and she was quite accustomed to being disturbed at her meals by rescue parties. But this, I think, was